All right, welcome everyone to week 10. So we're going to, last week we spent the majority of the workshop unpacking the example of the 4Rs tool for reflection. So I've actually posted that in two different places on our Blackboard site in the assessment folder, just for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to look at the 4Rs framework in detail and you needed a little bit more clarification on it. So as you can see, I've got here, for those of you who are watching the recording, prior to this recording, please make sure that you watch the 4 videos in our Zoom preparation PowerPoint. So that's really important so that you can really develop a good understanding of each of the 8 pedagogies that were unpacked in the lecture, and also to help you understand those pedagogies and relate them to practice, because this is going to be very important in your second reflection around pedagogy. So we're going to be building this week on understandings from last week's lecture, and also, of course, from the readings around pedagogy. So in this workshop, we're actually going to break down and check on your understandings of pedagogy so far. And as I said, you would have developed these understandings through coming to the lecture or watching the lecture and what was outlined in chapter 8 of the textbook. So in our lecture, we focused on 8 different pedagogies. But as I said, there are many more that you're going to come across in your placement and in other units. So to get us started, drawing on your understandings that you have developed from the lecture and your textbook reading, what do you think pedagogy is? Now, I want everyone to have a go at this. I want you to either verbalize it or to type it in the chat. And those of you watching at home, maybe jot down what you think pedagogy is. It's a very general question, and I'm assuming we're going to come up with lots and lots of different ideas, because pedagogy is quite a personal thing in some cases. So I'd like you to really take a few moments and think about what it is. Then type it into the chat or verbalize it. So we've got the ideas, understandings teachers possess and utilize in different ways to present this knowledge to others. Excellent, I like it. Another one was the method of teaching. Yep. Also, the deliberate, thoughtful, and purposeful decisions, practices, and interactions teachers participate in and initiate in order to differentiate learning and provide equitable educational outcomes for students. Beautiful. I like that. I really like the emphasis on individual students. The how of teaching, so the teaching strategies, ways of teaching effectively and catering for diverse needs, the method or teaching practice, and the how of teaching. Excellent. All good. Yeah. Interaction between teachers and students in learning environments, theory and practice of learning. Yeah. So all of these are really good responses. So they are slightly different, but they're all very relevant. Okay, I think that might be it. Yep. So the practice of shaping students. Okay. It can also be interlinked with our own beliefs and values. Excellent, Lara, most definitely. And also, very importantly, with the context. So the context of your learning environment. So it's the why, the what, and the how of a teacher's practice. So before we unpack the clips that you watched prior to the Zoom session, I'm going to do a quick overview of the 8 pedagogies that I unpacked in the lecture. I really want to make sure that you have a good understanding of these because, as I said, these understandings are going to be the basis of unpacking the case study in the second reflection. And then later on, we're going to have a close look at the case studies and unpacking each of the steps in completing this second reflection. Okay, so first up, I noted in the lecture that school curriculum content, it involves knowledge from multiple disciplines. So knowledge that has been translated to and transformed within social context, so especially schooling. So this specialized professional knowledge is what Schulman termed pedagogical content knowledge. So this is discipline-specific knowledge necessary to teach effectively in specific context areas. So some of the strategies that I went through in the lecture involved in PCK, providing explanations and examples and demonstrations, teaching strategies, so using teaching strategies that are relevant to the subject content that's being taught, offering analyzing and visual conceptualizations. So for example, graphic organizers. So it's about how you decide on presenting that knowledge and making sure that the way that you choose to present the knowledge is comprehensible and relevant to the students as well. So collaborative pedagogies, the second pedagogy that we looked at in the lecture, this recognizes that learning is influenced by social factors and that knowledge and life skills are constructed when we interact with others. So collaborative pedagogy can provide children and students the important opportunity to develop those teamwork skills. And it's also important in terms of alleviating student isolation in the classroom or the learning environment. So it's about feeling like you're part of the learning culture of the environment. It's a very student-centered approach, so encouraging the use of independent learning strategies while still importantly recognizing that the teacher's role is very critical in setting up the environment and guiding the expectations. So it also encourages peer teaching and feedback. And in doing this, it can really help students to clarify ideas and understandings through discussion. So very similar to, I think a good example is the think, pair, share strategies that we use in our face-to-face classes and also in our Zoom breakout groups as well. It's an approach that really encourages critical thinking skills, and this is done through listening and debating with other students. So it can promote higher level thinking and also communication skills as well. And that's through the sharing of perspectives. So it may also involve other pedagogies as well. So it could be explicit instruction to set up the expectations for the group work. Often in group work, teachers allocate specific roles for students. So this is a very structured, directed group work, but we can also have student directed group work where it's more about cooperative learning, so not as structured. Unfortunately, group work and collaborative learning is something that a lot of beginning teachers avoid because it can be quite difficult. As you can imagine, it's not just about people or students working in groups together or working in a group, it's working as a group. So it takes a lot of organisation and pre-preparation. Okay, so explicit instruction. So this is a way to teach skills and concepts to students using direct structured instruction. So this helps to make lessons clear by modeling to students how to start, how to succeed at a task, and then making sure that they have plenty of time to practice. So this pedagogical approach would involve establishing predictable and purposeful routines and transitions so students know what to expect, so they're confident in knowing what to expect, explaining expectations and learning goals explicitly. So it might involve negotiating the behaviour expectations for individual work or for group work activities. It's also about modelling new skills that may be required to complete a task, ensuring that learners have all of the important materials and resources and strategies that they can use to problem solve in a specific task. And this may include accessing materials or using specific language to seek or to request help. There's also approaches where you might use word walls, where you have criteria or instructions or sentence starters or prompts up on a wall, so students can look at them at any time, so to remind themselves if they're unsure. And it's also very importantly about feedback, so providing students the thinking time necessary to generate a response or problem to complete an activity. So we call that just-in-time feedback, so providing that thinking time. And of course, making sure that feedback is very specific and supportive. So the next one was gradual release of responsibility. Again, this framework, it suggests that cognitive work, it should shift slowly and intentionally from the teacher modelling to joint responsibility between the teacher and the students, and finally to independent practice and then application by the learner. So our activity last week, where I broke down a worked example of the 4R framework, that's a good example of it. So I do, we do, you do. It's a very common method of teaching, a very common pedagogy that you will have noticed being used consistently across all of the clips. Critical pedagogy. So as we discussed last week, this centres on the notion of empowering students. So encouraging them to challenge assumptions, and to really start to foster those progressive ideas. And the examples that I used in the lecture last week were things like fighting the fight against racism, sexism, or things like income equality. So it's very much about assisting and supporting students to move from that transmissive, passive acceptance of information and understandings to actively and critically questioning what they hear and see. And this is vital in our society, because the amount of information that young people are receiving via social media, via all sorts of platforms, it's very important that they question what they see. And not just for students, for everyone, really, for all of us. So place-based pedagogy, that focuses on social, economic and ecological resources. So it's all about that local community. Has very strong connections to problem-based learning, to outdoor and nature-based learning, and of course to sustainability as well. So there are some strong links here to critical pedagogy, because the focus is again on those democratic approaches, on engagement and on community well-being. So as I noted in the lecture, a really good example was the legless lizard video that we watched. So, you know, it really, like critical pedagogy, place-based pedagogy often involves a focus on inquiry learning and project-based learning that we saw in the legless lizard clip. Yeah, so there are some very good examples in the 4 clips that you watched in your pre-workshop PowerPoint. So caring pedagogy, I think if we consider that a learning environment that reflects a caring pedagogy, it would be one where students feel respected, where they feel understood, appreciated and cared for. So research has really emphasized the power of caring relationships in education. So the influence of students' feelings and of their emotional state on their ability to learn and to promote, it also promotes that emotional growth as well. So it has a huge influence on their learning. And as we outlined in the week 9 lecture, it would involve having things like smaller group sizes, minimal competition, and also where diversity and individual students' needs and strengths and interests are really acknowledged and understood and considered in the learning environment. And it's also about teachers' actions and communication, conveying and modeling respect and care as well. So it's very much about how the teacher models those caring aspects in their learning environment. So the final one that we looked at in the lecture was a pedagogy of listening. So this is central, I think, to most pedagogies. So it enables us to build those strong and trusting relationships with students and children. So it's about making sure that our students know that we're aware of what they're saying, that we're accepting of their perspectives, and that we appreciate all of their contributions and understandings. So again, it's directly linked to that pedagogy of care as well. And active listening is central here. So all of those, the eye contact, the body language, paraphrasing, so that students, that you understand exactly what a student is saying, that their perspectives are understood and that they are correctly understood as well. So in your pre-workshop PowerPoint, there were 4 clips for you to reflect on. And there were some prompts, the ones that I've got on the slide. And we're going to discuss each clip in turn. And I'm going to ask you to share your observations and insights. Importantly, these understandings will assist you in completing this second reflection, the case study around pedagogy. So as I said before, you can verbalize your insights and your observations, or if you don't feel comfortable, I'm very happy. I encourage you to enter into the chat, which is what you've done with that initial pedagogy question. So thank you to all of those of you that responded there. So as we go through the clips, those of you who are watching the recording, who have watched the recording at home, you really need to make sure that you've watched the clips so that you can reflect on those pedagogies. So the first one you were asked to watch was from a kindergarten setting. And even if you are primary or secondary, I think it's still very relevant. I would hope that you've still taken the opportunity to watch it, because it really did show some important insights into some of those pedagogies that you may not see quite as much, in secondary. So let's have a look. I asked you to consider, how does the teacher interact with the students? What teacher strategies are being used? What is the physical layout of the learning environment? And what content or skills are being taught? So these are all observations that would help you to develop an understanding of the particular pedagogies that were evident. And I've even got them listed down the bottom on the slide, just to jog your memory as well. So those of you who watched the clip, what do you think was the most prominent pedagogy that was reflected in the teachers' approaches and the strategies that were used? Anyone want to verbalize?
I chose place-based.
Yeah.
For it. So they were out like exploring the environment. And then they were making connections to the wildlife. So they were saying, like, the lorikeets and the kookaburras might eat such and such seeds that they were collecting. So that's what I chose.
Excellent. Very good. So place-based pedagogy. Thank you for that. Anyone else? What other pedagogies were evident?
I went a different approach. I said more like collaborative or listening, because she was really focusing on her little team of students working together and helping them like solve when one of the little boys didn't have anything in his bowl. She was like really focusing on working with them to solve problems and things like that.
Excellent. So again, that's an insightful observation. So very much about modeling and encouraging sharing, which is the beginning and the basis of collaboration, whether it be taking turns or sharing and listening to the perspectives of others. In these early years, the prior to school context, often we see parallel play instead of collaborative play. But the teacher's role in these environments is to model and to encourage students to develop those skills. So that was a great observation. So so far we've got place-based and we've got collaborative. Anything else that we noticed? Caring pedagogy, definitely.
I was just going to say caring pedagogy.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything else about that?
No, nothing really to add, just that she was very caring in her approach, and really spending time with the children and listening to them, and that's basically it.
So we saw a pedagogy of listening there too, didn't we? That was they come hand in hand really, because the sort of strategies that we saw were she was getting down to the children's level, modeling, sharing and caring, eye contact, even though she had her eyes and ears constantly on other students as well, she was still actively listening to those students. Would you agree? I think that was Nikki, was it, that shared the caring pedagogy? I think. Or Ben. So pedagogy of listening, pedagogy of caring. There was also, I guess, in terms of critical pedagogy, I observed that there was lots of opportunity to extend children's learning and for future development of critical pedagogy as well. So there was pedagogical content knowledge in that she was sharing understandings about the seeds that they found and about birds, the use of open-ended questioning, and she would be using this to determine prior knowledge and also specific interests. So to make decisions about moving forward with the students, the children's learning as well. So lots happening in that very short clip. But I think the one thing that was very clear to me was really getting down to the students' level and interacting and paraphrasing as well. Excellent, well done. So those of you who are watching the recording, hopefully you have come up with some similar insights as well. Next one that we had a look at, this was a really lovely example. It was a bit of a giveaway. It was a primary school in Oregon. So what were the particular, the most prominent pedagogy in this one? Anyone? It was pretty clear. Place-based. Excellent. Thanks, Emma and Joey. And also inquiry-based, most definitely. Yeah. Collaborative pedagogies. Yeah. Yeah. So this one was a good example of place-based. And for a lot of you, I would hope that it really gave you a bit more of an understanding of what place-based involves, because we really are looking at being involved in the local community, making learning very relevant to students' lives, connecting learning to the environment. And a lot of the time people assume that place-based is just nature-based, but it's not. And I think this was wonderful how it talked about space, it talked about architecture, it talked about history. And those teaching strategies that were used, the use of the timeline, and that wonderful, wonderful project that they did where they did the field trip and looked at historical photos and made comparisons to their community today. I actually found that fascinating. If I was you, I'd be jotting that particular activity down in your teacher strategies companion, because I think that's a really great activity to do. That place-based linking to your history, to your community. It really is about, and what came out of this one as well, about knowing your community and having pride and feeling part of the community. So as has been put in the chat, there were collaborative pedagogies, critical pedagogies, hands-on, project-based, multimodal as well. The collaborative groups that were building the constructions, and they were taking images with their phones. Also, sustainability was another one. Did anyone else notice that? They were talking about being stewards of the world that they live in, and the students' role in their world. So very much aspects of sustainability. They also talked about fire ecology, geology, and they also were talking about activities, maths activities, where they were using place-based pedagogy to put maths in context. So they went out and they were looking at geology, the geology of their environments, and putting maths in context in their specific environment. I found that really fascinating as well. Anything else that anyone wanted to add? So the third example, this was an interesting one. It was a high school science. So this teacher, as it says on the slide, took a conceptual approach to science. What specific pedagogies did you observe here? This was an interesting one. Who watched this one? Give me a thumbs up so I know. Joey did. Excellent. Ben, is there something that you would like to contribute to the chat there, guys? Hands-on learning. Thank you. Yeah, very much so. What about explicit instruction? Yeah, Ben's just added that. Thank you. Yeah, they did science inquiry. So in explicit instruction, since he showed other students how to direct. Yeah, so there were really good examples of the teacher modeling. So the I do, we do, you do. So hands-on and then scaffolding with theory as well. Again, there was a really good emphasis on bringing context into the school. Yeah, pedagogical content knowledge, as he had a lot of knowledge around science and how to teach the content. So I think definitely right there, Molly. Really, in terms of strategies for pedagogical content knowledge, explanations and demonstration, the teaching strategies were very relevant to the content, and the ways that he presented it were really understandable for the students. I loved the way when they were dissecting the heart that they got, he got them to dress up with gloves on and in, you know, with the aprons on, and you know, really putting them into that specific context. That was great. They also talked in terms of the contextual approach. They had a scientist come into the school as well. So that was a real world understanding. They did things like presented their projects on assembly. So I would be thinking about place-based for that as well. So sharing that. And I think one of the things that I really noticed as well was in terms of how the teacher was interacting with the children. He was so enthusiastic. And I think that's a huge part of, you know, teaching a specific content area. You know, you can explain, you can demonstrate, but if you don't have that enthusiasm to really encourage engagement with the students, you know, it doesn't work as effectively. Anything else that anyone wanted to add there? Okay, so The fourth example was a really interesting one, Tinkering School. So that was from a TED talk. So what did we think here? Lots and lots of different pedagogies in this one. Anyone want to verbalize? What they thought? Who got to see this one? So we've got inquiry-based, student-centered, very much so. Gradual release of responsibility. That was a good one. How did you see that one? Joey, did you want to share that? You don't have to.
And the teacher trusts that the students are able to use the real tools and materials to build things they want to do. And I think it is students take their responsibility of learning.
Yes, yes, very much so. So there was that gradual release of responsibility, and there was also explicit instruction involved in that as well. So there would be the I do, we do, you do in developing the understanding and the confidence to use some of those pretty, full-on tools. And some of the students were quite young as well. So inquiry-based, yes, definitely. Really looking at, developing a deep understanding of the use of tools and things. Emma, did you want to expand on that at all? How you saw the inquiry base?
They were kind of almost given freedom to decide what they wanted to create, and they kind of had to make a solution for it, and they realized that things don't always work out, but
yeah, definitely. That was excellent. Very good. So yeah, I liked what they were saying, that success was in the doing, not the failing. So as Nikki said, encouraging risk-taking, problem-solving, focused on the process, not the outcome. Yeah, so celebrating failures, I guess, and, critically analysing them and coming up with new strategies as well. There were lots of collaborative, I would say collaborative approaches we used here as well, with students and teachers working together to solve problems. Yeah. Resilience, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, anything further that anyone wanted to add? So on the slide here, I asked you in the pre-workshop preparation activity to think about some different pedagogical frameworks that your teachers have used in the past. I wanted you to think about one that you liked, one that you didn't like, and one that you were unsure about. So if you wanted to chat, type in the chat first, a pedagogy that you found as a student really suited you, that it was something that, a teacher used that you felt that you responded to. So you can choose from the list down the bottom there in green. So those of you watching the recording, I'd like you to think about this as well. Think about those, the pedagogies that your teachers used. So collaborative pedagogies, that seems to be a really a big one. Lara, what was the focus on collaborative pedagogy that you liked?
I'm going to admit here that it's been a really long time since I was at school and I couldn't really remember the pedagogies used back in my day.
Yeah.
But I'm just sort of reflecting on them all, thinking if I was a young student now, that's something I would definitely respond to. Just that whole, interaction with my peers and teamwork and, yeah, kind of, I enjoy that at university as well, and learning off each other and sharing different ideas, etc. So
yeah, so sharing perspectives.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a really important skill to have, working in groups, that teamwork. and being able to share perspectives and take on other people's perspectives respectively, respectfully, even if you don't actually, you know, agree with them. So place-based, Emma has said, being able to explore the environment external to the classroom. It added depth and relevance through visualization and connecting to the surrounding environment. Excellent, Emma. Yeah, I agree. I think I would, reflecting back, Lara, I think mine was even a lot longer than yours, but from what I can remember, those we had in my school, it was actually, I went to Callum Vale State School, which is now Calambar College. And it was a very long time ago. All of the buildings were still wooden. I wouldn't say we were using slates and things, but it was quite a long time ago. But we had a braille trail. One of the teachers had set up a braille trail out in a forested area, and we would have to be blindfolded and make our way through there. And, you know, it was a very important part of me developing an understanding about diversity, but also about how the actual environment can really help with students' understanding. So how teachers use the environment. It was really powerful for me. Karen says gradual release of responsibility. Did you want to add anything to that, Karen? Was there anything specifically about gradual release of responsibility that you found particularly helpful?
Yeah, I like the way teacher not directly let me just do the study stuff myself. So I like the way teacher just teach me and um, let me collaborate with others so I could learn from others. Then I know I have the ability to do myself. I won't be afraid to directly do it myself.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Very good. Thank you for sharing those. So what about one that you didn't like? Something that you know, of those ones listed there in green, was there a pedagogy that you really didn't find worked for you? No one's mentioned critical pedagogy, which I find interesting. You know, just that encouraging you to question your, sorry, trigger happy, encouraging you to question and to build your understandings. Can anyone think back to a particular activity or anything that you used in terms of critical pedagogy? I asked this in the lecture and I think a lot of you had difficulty with that. Any thoughts? I think the example that I gave about the Braille trail, I think that is, you know, as well as being place-based, I think that's critical as well. Like really, the teachers were encouraging us as students to put ourselves into the shoes of other people and experiencing someone's diversity, you know, someone that was visually impaired, how they would approach things. So yeah, critical pedagogy is a really important one, I think, and it's very much linked to inquiry-based learning. And again, I keep going back to the legless lizard example because that was a very good example of critical pedagogy and of course place-based. So explicit instruction pedagogy, depending on learning styles, may not resonate with all students. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think though a lot of in a lot of situations that explicit instruction, if you know, with using tools or specific resources that I do we do, you do is quite important. Okay. Now we're going to move on now to have a talk about the second case study. So I am hoping that most of you are well and truly on the way to finishing that first reflection around diversity. So we have strongly suggested that you complete your draft of the first reflection before you move on to the second. Hi, Angela, just in time. We've just started talking about the assessment task.
That's good.
So I was just saying that it's really strongly suggested that you complete at least the draft of the first one before moving on to the second. And I've had a lot of students, a lot of my internal students, and those of you in my external group as well, that if you weren't available, if you weren't able to get to that week 9 workshop where we did the feedback, the tag feedback, I've been encouraging students to send me those first 2 R's just to make sure you're on the right track, those external students. Making sure that, you know, you're doing the right thing going forward, so you won't make, you know, if you're not, that you will have a good understanding. So there are different case studies for early childhood and primary and secondary. So these are available in the assessment task 2 folder. And they're very clearly labeled. So I think I had an email, someone was worried that they weren't using the right one. So it very clearly says which particular one is for primary and early childhood and which one is for secondary. Got a question for our case study 2 reflection. Can we talk about more than one pedagogy if it is relevant? Splendid question, Ben, and the answer is yes. Because as we saw in this, looking at the clips, there was not just one pedagogy that the teachers were using, there were several. So I'm happy for you to refer to more than one, but again, making sure that you refer in depth. So it's better to concentrate on a few in depth than a lot without as much depth. Good question. So I'm going to start. I'll go through the requirements of the early childhood primary case study first. So on Blackboard, it actually outlines absolutely everything that I'm going through here. So it breaks it down very clearly into 5 stages. So both of the case studies, the early childhood primary and the secondary, are presented in the same way. So step 1, it asked you to look through the case study 2 presented in the PowerPoint. So this is based on a pre-service teacher, Demi, in their first placement. So in the case study, you're provided with a number of artifacts. So it includes a professional journal written by Demi, feedback from their supervising teacher, email and social media exchanges, videos and interviews with young people. So there's a lot in there for you to go through. So what it's asking you to do after going through the case study, you need to choose one critical moment to focus on. So again, it's something that made you wonder, something that you can relate to if you were in Demi's position as a pre-service teacher. Now, I'm going to give you, as I did last time, I'm going to give you a sentence starter just to help you in terms of, understanding the perspective. So I've written down, imagining myself as the beginning teacher and going through the placement artifacts, the critical moment for me was, insert here. This is important because, insert here. It made me question, insert here. So if we have a look at our 4R framework, in that first report and respond stage, it says reported what happened or what the issue or incident involved. So that would be imagining myself as the beginning teacher and going through the placement artifacts. The critical moment for me was. So you don't have to, go through absolutely everything. You would describe that specific critical moment that was most significant to you in the case study. And you would describe, as it says in the 4R tool for reflection guide, why it's relevant. So this is relevant to education because, or this is important because. Then you would pose some questions to address as a result of the incident, exactly the same as you did in the first reflection on diversity. So it made me question. So these questions are then the basis of the following 3 R's, as we've discussed in each of our workshops. So once you've outlined the particular critical incident or the stimulus, you forget about it. The focus now is on your critical reflections, your critical issue. And so this will be around pedagogy. Any questions at this point? Did you want me to repeat the sentence starter that I suggested? Okay, so I said, imagining myself as the beginning teacher and going through the placement artifacts, the critical moment for me was. So you would describe that critical moment, and then this is important because. And then it made me question. So you would pose, some of you in your reflections for diversity, some of you have posed 2 questions, which I think is probably a good one, a more general question, and then maybe a question about strategies that teachers might use in their practice. That seems to be generally what everyone's been focusing on. So then after you have decided on your, that critical moment and your critical issue, and you've outlined the questions, then you would move into your second one, how you relate to it, your third one, reasoning, so where you're going to be connecting to theory, to the Australian Professional Standards, and then of course, the fourth one, which is worth more marks because it's most significant. This is where you're going to be thinking about how you can relate it to your future practice. So the sort of strategies that you would be using in your classroom. So it's important that you go into quite a bit of depth with this, and I would refer back to the theory as well. So those strategies should come from the theory that you've unpacked in that third section, reasoning. Yeah, I can see lots of nodding. That's good. Any questions? Feel free to pop them into the chat if you do have questions as we go through. So step 3, and this is, I guess it's step 3, but it's also what you should be doing generally as well. So engaging with the learning materials and readings from weeks 9 and 10, including chapter 8 of the Churchill et al. 2019 textbook and chapter 3 of the Allen and White textbook, and also looking at the Australian professional standards. So as I've suggested before, you would look at those chapters, and from within those chapters, I would be pulling out research that is specifically relevant to your focus on pedagogy. Same as what we did with the diversity focus. You would ensure that you carefully go through the 4R reflective framework in writing your 500 words. So again, just like your reflection on diversity, you need to go through each of those 4 stages. So a paragraph or 2 for each one, and making sure that I suggest using headings. I think that's a good guide for you. Jake, you had a question?
Hi, sorry, yeah. I just had a question about using the textbooks like Churchill and Allen and White.
Yeah.
On the task sheet where it says like we're recommended to use 3 to 4 sources to obviously to back up information.
Mm-hmm.
Using the 2 textbooks, do they count as as 3 to the listed 3 or 4 sources we can use within this, or is it like the 3 or 4 sources like separate content we find other than the book?
Okay, so as I've explained in previous workshops, when you're using the textbooks, this is a great question, Jake, by the way, when you're using the textbooks, you would be looking, I don't actually have my textbook here with me. Let me have a look. No. You would be looking at the specific textbook, either of them. You would go to the relevant area. So you might want to use the in-text to look up the particular focus that you're looking at. So you will be reading through the textbook and you'll find a particular point and it will have a reference. So you would go to the reference list at the end of that chapter in the textbook and you would find that reference. You would type it into or copy and paste it into the library database,
Okay.
into the search engine, and you would have a look at the research, have a look at the article, and then you would cite that particular research in text and then also in your reference list. And that's one perspective.
Okay.
If you're going through the textbook and you read something and it's something general that is not referenced specifically, you would reference the textbook. So it would be Churchill et al. Or Allen and White.
Okay, and then that textbook would be one of the scholarly sources we use.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. That perfect sense. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So, it's really about looking at different perspectives. But I always encourage students to go to the original source and to unpack it and to look at it in its entirety rather than just a particular chunk that you found in the textbook. Go and actually read it to see it in its entirety. Does that help, Jake?
Definitely, yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. So you really need to make sure that you source relevant current literature to reference all your ideas that are not your own. So there will be I statements in this, of course, in your reflections, as we said before, which you don't have to reference because they're your own thoughts, your own opinions. But of course, especially in that reason section and in the reconstruct section, the fourth one, you will be making connections to research, to theories. So you will need to reference them in text. And of course, making links to the Australian professional standards. So finding which particular standards are relevant to your critical issue. So you can include your reference list at the end of each reflection if you want to, or you can have one reference list at the end with all three reflections referenced there. So each of your in-text references referenced at the very end. It's up to you. Either is acceptable. Any questions about that? Do you know what I mean? So for the first, yes, we have a question. Who put their thumb up? Does someone have a question? Oh no, just saying understand. I get you. Duh. All right, so and then of course you submit your second reflection with your other two reflections by Sunday, June the 6th. So any further questions about that? If you're going through and you're a little bit confused, email your tutor. So external students, you're welcome to email me. Internal students that are listening to the recording, email your specific tutor to seek some clarification. Make sure you do that. Don't sit worrying about it. Make sure you actually ask them. That's what they're there for. You can also have a look on the Padlet to see if someone's asked a similar question, but of course, make sure you've had a good look at the task sheet and the criteria sheet before you do that. Okay, primary and early childhood. I'm going to move on to the secondary case study. I suggest you still stick around because there might be questions that actually are relevant to you as well. So case study 2 for the secondary students. As I said, it's a very similar setup as the primary one. So as outlined in Blackboard, it's in 5 particular stages. So again, it's around pedagogy as well. So step 1, you need to watch the 3 videos on Blackboard and consider the associated questions around pedagogy. So it's suggesting that you respond to the questions because this is going to help you identify a critical moment and then your specific critical issue. And it's also, these questions are going to help you to reflect on each of the stages in the 3R framework. So for example, the first video, it involves David, a secondary teacher, engaging with parents in the community. So you're encouraged to think about how the school is engaging with parents in the community, to describe the benefits of working with the local community, to consider what prior experiences you have with working with local communities. So these are questions that are very relevant to the 4Rs, points that you would need to be considering. So you might go through that video and think of a critical moment that really captured you and thought, oh, okay, that makes me think about blah, blah, blah. So you would look at all 3 videos and respond to each of the questions. So the second one is Sanderson Middle School in Darwin, and the third video is about engaging with students. And so again, they've got questions for you to unpack there as well. Again, I would recommend a sentence starter, something like, from watching the 3 videos and responding to the questions, the critical moment for me was. This is important because it made me question. So you don't have to use those exact words, but I'm just posing these just to help you understand the direction that you might want to take in doing this and how you would be relating to that first R, report and respond. So yeah, from watching the issues, from watching the videos and considering the questions, you then need to identify one critical moment to focus on. And from that critical moment, there'll be an issue that is related to pedagogy that's really significant. So something that you can reflect on, something that you might have a personal connection with. So step 2, the same as with the primary one, making sure that you engage with the learning materials and the readings. Choosing a critical moment and an issue will be made so much easier if you've really done the reading well. I would suggest going through a couple of times with the readings to make sure that you have a very good understanding. And again, the same, making sure you make links to the Australian professional standards. And again, going through each of the stages, the reflection stages, and responding to the dot points on the particular. This is the Bible. So this is what you would be going through as I broke down last week. And as well as that, you would constantly be looking at the criteria sheet as well. So again, making sure that you source relevant and current literature. You should have a good understanding of what that is now. Avoid the use of websites, of TED Talks, all of those sorts of things. We're looking at current scholarly sources. If, though, you find something within your textbook and it's like, oh, 15 years old, and you think, or it's, you know, from 2010, you think that's pretty old. The fact that your textbook has referenced it means that it's probably seminal, that it's important literature, and we're very happy for you to cite that. Any questions about the currency of literature? No? Okay. Yeah, so making sure that you use APA for both your in-text referencing and also for your reference list. So as I said last week, you should, from the feedback that you received on your first assessment task and from becoming more and more familiar with SiteWrite, you should have a much better understanding of the use of APA, so APA 7, and we would expect to see a definite improvement from the first assessment task to the second. Also making sure that you use good paragraphing, sentence structuring, grammar, spelling, all of those sorts of things. Make sure that you carefully proofread your assignment. It's very important. And I would be very the use of direct quotes in this assessment task. You won't need to use direct quotes. Paraphrase. Direct quotes should only be used if they're really significant, if it's a famous quote or something like that. Really, you should be paraphrasing. Any questions about that? And remembering, if you do find a quote that you think you can't paraphrase, that you need that specific wording, to make sure you use a page number to identify specifically where you got it from, and quotation marks as well. Any questions? No? Okay, thumbs up there. Okay, well, we pretty much have finished up now. I guess one of the important things that I'd like you to do is to make sure you're very familiar with all of those 8 pedagogical approaches. I unpacked them again, just very briefly, just to give you a bit of an overview of them, because they're the ones that we would be expecting to see in your second reflection. Not all of them, of course, the ones that are most relevant. You may find other pedagogies within your textbook that you want to refer to. That's perfectly okay. As I said, we can't go through every single pedagogy because there are lots of them, and it will be very much dependent on the individual students you're working with and also your context. Okay. I'm just going to give you a few more moments if anyone is busily typing a question in there in the chat. Nope. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So next week is our final lecture, and it will also be our final workshop in terms of content. We're going to be going through curriculum, and so the following week it will be a drop-in session in the workshop. So next week will be our last content focused workshop, and the one after that will be a drop-in session to assist you with assessment. Jake, you had a question?
Sorry, yeah, just another question.
No, please don't apologize. That's what we're here for. We love questions.
I was just wondering, I was a little confused about the APST links we had to make.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure how to, when we write it up, do we simply just say like APST 1.5 or
I would
6.4?
say something like you would note how it might relate to your specific focus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So just like a quick little sentence about how it applies
definitely.
to. Okay.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to see just you popping in the standard in brackets. I would like you to break down briefly how it actually relates to that particular focus.
Okay. Easy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'm glad you think it's easy. Anything else before we finish up?
I wonder, when we relate it to ourselves in the relate to self section.
Yeah.
Obviously, we haven't done any teaching or anything at the moment. So are we relating maybe something that's happened in our schooling or something like that, or?
That was one of the reasons why a good question. One of the reasons why we had that little discussion at the end about some of the pedagogies that was significant in your schooling. You could relate to your schooling. I think that would be applicable. Some of you have had some teaching experience. I know in prior to school and after school contexts, there are quite a few actually, which is wonderful. So I would be relating to that as well, but I do understand where you're coming from with that. For those of you that possibly can't quite remember, I think what I'd like you to do is to go back to that slide that we looked at about thinking back, because that's really significant in terms of that relating to self stage. So basically the exercise that we did there, we didn't get to the one that you were unsure about, but think about that. That might be something that you could reflect on to help you there. A question: we could relate to our experience of placement. Can you clarify what you mean there, please, Karen? Have you been on a placement previously?
Yeah, I mean, I came from the diploma, so
Definitely. Yes, yes. If you've had any teaching experience whatsoever, I'd be considering that, making connections with that.
Yeah, I just saw some of the words my supervisor have sent to me. I think that will be the related point.
Good, good, excellent.
Okay.
So it says in the reason, in the relating section, comment on whether you've seen this before or not. So if it's something that you may have seen during your schooling or in your experience with education anyway. Comment on whether the conditions were the same or different, if that's relevant. Explain whether you have the skills or knowledge to deal with the incident or issue. Links to your personal knowledge, insight that you might have about the situation or issue in terms of personal and or professional experience and knowledge and understandings or skills. Clear link to how it relates to the critical incident. So you're thinking about your experience and how it relates specifically to that issue. So you're not focusing on the stimulus, you're focusing now on the questions that you are posing. So the questions that you posed at the end of your report and respond, that's what you will be focusing on. As I said last week, the stimulus is just that, it's a stimulus. So you only need to take note of that in that first report and respond stage. The rest of your reflection will be focused on that critical incident or issue. I know some of you were a little bit confused about that last week, so I went into quite a bit of depth about it. Anyone still have any questions about that? That's why I've given you the sentence starters, to make sure that you really know that you need to focus specifically on those important questions that you pose. So the questions are important because that will make it easy or hard in terms of relating both personally and also relating to the theory. So it needs to be something that you can relate to theory. I have been advising a lot of students when they sent me their draft of their first 2 R's to focus maybe one of the questions on something that you can relate personally to, and then the second one maybe on something that is very easy to unpack in terms of the theory. So specific points or questions that you want to address in terms of theory and the Australian professional standards. Yes? No? So those questions that you pose are quite important. It's an important choice to make. So they have to be focused specifically around pedagogy. because that's our focus for the second reflection. So you need to pull something out of the case study that you can reflect on in terms of pedagogy. An example that I thought of when I was going through the early childhood and primary scenario, I saw there was a journal entry where Demi had reflected on her lesson. So she, parts of it where she said that they were disastrous. And so she reflected on that. And she also reflected on student collaboration. And this actually, it made me question how could you use collaborative pedagogy in a classroom to assist students? So you could pose some critical questions about that, what strategies relate to collaborative pedagogy, so that you would be looking at then in the reason stage, you would be looking at those specific factors that relate to collaborative practice. And then in the fourth one, you would be unpacking strategies that could be used in the classroom around collaborative practice. This is, I think someone posed the question, could I relate to more than one pedagogy? And I said, yep, that would be fine, as long as you did it in depth. I would much prefer to see you focusing on one pedagogy and really unpacking it in depth than several pedagogies, but just scratching the surface. The depth is really important here. And the more depth you go into, the easier it's going to be to go through each of those reflection stages. Okay. I said I was going to go. That was a long time ago. Definitely finishing. Oh, another question.
So, can I ask one quick question? So when you were talking about like using different perspectives, I'm not sure how, like in my first one, I talked about, like I referenced Akara and the Yunka Porter one with the 8 different Indigenous ways of learning. I'm not sure if that's different perspectives or how. Yeah.
That's good. I love the fact that you are, you're referencing policy documents. That's fabulous. I think that's really good. But I would also look at specific research in that area within your textbooks as well. So look at perspectives in terms of the research around the focus issue as well. Does that help?
I'm just not really sure. Are you meaning like, because mine's about like Indigenous learning, and I was talking about how like what methods I could use to help.
Yep, so that would be the methods, the strategies that would be in your reconstruct section. So in the reason section, you would be looking at the relationship between theory and practice. So you want to develop a deep understanding about the theory around your focus issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I think in that section, I talked a bit more about like what the issue was and like the difference between like retention rates and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is that okay to use there, or should I be talking about that more?
I think to introduce that in that section is really good. And then you would discuss it in section 4, in stage 4, in terms of specific strategies, classroom-based strategies.
Okay, but just using different sources is enough for different perspectives, if that makes sense?
Yes. But theoretical sources as well as policy sources as well. So you need to go beyond just referencing ACARA. You need to look at the actual research from within your textbook.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Final call, final call. Okay, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I shall see you next week for our final lecture around curriculum, and then our final workshop around curriculum, where we'll talk about the third case study. Okay, thank you, everyone.